Cool. All right. Well, happy Monday, guys. I'm going to jump right in. I know people will join a little later and they can watch the replay as well. So I thought let's tackle a question that kind of comes up a bit in terms of when you are starting to make progress and then hey, you hit the dreaded plateau. So I thought let's take a moment and chat about that. As always, I like to give a little background, like what's actually happening. I think it's important for people to understand the mechanics of like why that happens, and then generally leads us to an answer, right? What to do about that. So that's what we'll tackle today. So, all right. Here's the truth. We'll just start with this. You're going to hit a plateau at some point. That is a very normal response. That's actually how your body is intended to work. So I think just starting with that premise and understanding, this is actually how the body's designed is helpful. Might like ease a little bit of anxiety, and then help us actually get in front of it, which is kind of what we'll talk about, how we can do that. So it's really, really normal. This is how your body is supposed to act, right? It's really responding to the fact that there's less energy coming in, right? So you're not doing anything wrong when that is happening. Your body just doesn't really understand intentional restriction. It definitely has mechanisms to deal with less energy coming in. I mean, we are programmed for survival, and so lots of things will start to like kick in when not enough energy is actually being taken in by the body. But it doesn't really understand like that sometimes we do this for vanity or, even for health, right? Where we restrict in order to lower body weight. So I think it's important to just kind of see that as, okay, the body is just like interpreting like, hey, this isn't good. Like we're not getting enough energy coming in. It's a bit of a threat, right? And it's just kind of extrapolate like, well, I don't know how long this energy restriction is going to be happening for. And so it understands like, well, we can't lose weight forever. That's not going to be good for survival. So I like to just place that foundation there. Like your body's not betraying you. Your body's actually working with you for you in terms of like, it's just trying to ensure survival. So that can be helpful in just understanding like you're not doing anything wrong, and like your body also is not betraying you or trying to ruin your progress there. So I think that that's a good place to just start with like, okay, this is natural. It's what should be happening. So I think then the first thing we should talk about is, well, how do you actually know if you're truly in a plateau, right? Because that would obviously be the first thing we'd want to just really check off the list. Like, is this truly a plateau before we start making changes or get, too stressed out about it? So I would say personally, I'd like to see that nothing's happening for like 2 to really like 4 weeks. Yeah, like 4 weeks. We really, really need to give this time, right? Again, if you think about your body as an adaptive, responsive machine, it needs time to kind of like take the inputs, kind of like calculate, okay, I see what's happening here. I see some patterns. And it'll give it some time before it starts to react. So you definitely want to look at like, how long have you been at your plateau? Has it really been long enough to deem you in a plateau? If you don't lose weight for 1 week, that's not a plateau, not at all. That could be very normal, especially for women, right? And that's predominantly what I work with, right? We have hormones that are fluctuating on a 28 plus day cycle. And for some of us, that's actually less. And for some of us, that's a little more, but we'll just say on average 28 days. So our hormones are on a like 28-day cycle, which means we could have fluctuations, that are very different. Let's say weeks 1 and 2 versus weeks 3 and 4 of our own cycle. Whereas men are on a 24-hour hormonal cycle. And so that's a little different in terms of when they're looking at changes that are happening, right? For us, like those hormonal fluctuations, which are normal and should happen and which drive your cycle, those things are going to impact things like water retention, your hunger, your cravings, your motivation, just your desire to work out and move, mindset, and even how the body is like processing carbohydrates, right? We're more insulin sensitive at some points and less sensitive at others. So all of that you can see like is going to have a huge impact. So as women, if you're in a plateau, you need to wait and you need to like see like, is this truly actually a plateau, or are there other factors really coming in into play here? So as a side note, I could do a whole training. I'm very fascinated with, connecting the dots for women in terms of their cycle. You might want to actually track your cycle alongside your progress and do things like looking at where you're at in your cycle and comparing those weeks versus just day to day, where men can do that much easier. Women cannot, right? So I would want to look at like week one for month one and week one versus month two, right? So I'm looking at the same time and looking at, well, is progress being made or not? And you'd be very surprised to see, oh, I am making progress when I look at it in terms of, let's say, my cycle. All right, well, this training is not about our cycle, but it's definitely something we have to talk about and say, like, that is a possibility in terms of why we are or not seeing some progress there. Okay, so how to know? Again, you're looking at like this 2 to 4 week, and I'd really err on the side of like 4 weeks of like nothing's happening. Okay, now we can determine like, yep, I think that we possibly have stalled in our progress. Okay, so then what do we do if we're determining, yes, we definitely are in a plateau? Well, we still want to actually take it another step further to determine, okay, we haven't seen progress, let's say for 2 to 4 weeks, more like 4 weeks, right? Let's go ahead and say that's the case. Have we now, well, I guess we should say this. Let's look at our actions then in these last 4 weeks, right? So for example, you got to kind of become a detective here. Have you become a little too flexible? And this is not a judgment call. This is not to say like, are you messing up or are you cheating on your diet? Not at all. This is a super normal phenomena that like in the beginning, like motivation is super high, right? We want to do all the things and we're usually really good at like tracking and actually making sure we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's in terms of like hitting our protocol. But over time, right, that motivation starts to wane. That's normal. That's okay. But what happens is we start to make exceptions and we start to say, it's okay. Like, I don't have to weigh that peanut butter anymore. Or I know how much oatmeal I need. Right. And so we start to make these exceptions, but what ends up happening is we're probably allowing a little too much flexibility, which can then create a problem on the back end in that we're not truly hitting our protocol. So there's that. Number one is how flexible have we become? And that's a normal thing. We want to just be curious, like, have I become a little more relaxed because I'm more comfortable, let's say weighing and tracking or, hitting my protocol. The next thing we want to look at is, has any new stress entered the scene, right? Like, or has stress increased during this time? Because stress definitely is a huge factor in your progress. If you go back to how we even just started this, how your body doesn't like to see you, let's say, in a deficit for long periods of time because of survival. Well, if we now add stress on top of that, the body's really going to be like, this doesn't seem like a good idea. And it could be pulling back the reins because of this either new stress. So this, things like a new job or you're moving, just work stress in general, relationship stress. It could be any type, any perceived stress that we have, or an increased stress, financial stress, right? Big decisions that you need to make. Those things will, get in the way of your progress. So we want to look at, is there anything new that's happened in terms of stress that is kind of getting in the way of our progress? Another thing we want to look at is, did we introduce any new foods during that time? We know that sometimes we do end up having sensitivities to certain foods. And so maybe there are foods that are creating bloating, creating gas, right? Just creating a little bit of inflammation that can be masking possible progress that we're making, but we're not seeing that because of just the inflammation that's getting increased by that food. So is there anything new that we're adding, let's say, to the diet? And the last thing I think we want to look at is, are we actually tracking correctly? And this kind of goes back to, are we being a little too flexible, but also like we should just go back and just make sure, like, am I actually tracking things the way that I should? So for example, meat gets, mistracked all the time, because are you weighing it, let's say, cooked, or are you weighing it raw? Because that's very different. In fact, we know, let's say a raw piece of, let's say, chicken breast, once you cook it, it's going to reduce in size by 25%, up to 25%, we'll say. And so if you're going to track that as raw, but it's actually cooked, you could really see a huge difference there. So we want to just go back and say, okay, are we actually even tracking correctly? Or are we making just minor mistakes that are just adding up over time? So if any of those are amiss, right? So, are we a little too flexible? Are there any new stresses or increased stress during this time? Have we introduced any new foods that might be problematic? And are we checking to make sure we actually are tracking correctly, right? If anything is amiss in those four, well, then we have work to do. We can't necessarily determine that we're in a plateau yet, because we have things, right, that aren't quite on point at this time. So we want to do that first, because maybe we're not in a plateau. Maybe we just have stress that we need to deal with. Maybe there are just foods we've introduced that are not agreeing with us right now, and we need to take them off the table, right? Maybe we've just become a little too flexible and comfortable. And so we need to just, tighten the reins a bit while we are, trying to create these results. So determine again whether we really are in a plateau. Remember, there's determining you're in a plateau because no progress has been made for, let's say, up to 4 weeks, and then determining if we are, based on these 4 determinants, right, of flexibility, stress, new food sensitivities possibly, and then tracking errors. Okay, so let's say all of that checks out. Like, yep, we haven't seen any progress. We're good. We checked. We're not being flexible, or too flexible, I should say. We're tracking good. There's no new foods. Stress is the same. Okay, so now let's get into the nitty gritty of, okay, what do we do when we have hit this stall in our progress? So first thing I'd want you to ask yourself is, well, how long have I been dieting? Because there's certainly a cap. I think this needs to be talked about a little bit more, that we can't just diet forever. You can't just like drop your calories and think that you're just going to ride this out until you lose 100 pounds or whatever your goal is. That's not realistic, and that's not healthy. It's not the way the body's going to work either, right? You're not going to get the best results by just like stepping on the gas and saying, nope, I'm just going to keep going until I get my results. That's a little short-sighted in terms of understanding physiology. So if you've been dieting, let's say 3 to 4 months, you've been diligent, you've been hitting your targets, you've been in a deficit, and you've now plateaued. You've officially, gone through the checklist I just gave you. You're like, yeah, I'm at a plateau. The simple answer is you need a break for all the reasons I just outlined. We cannot just push forward endlessly. The body won't allow it, right? Remember, go back to how we started this, survival. Your body's always hedging for your survival. And so it's going to slow that progress, I should say, if it just doesn't see an end to this ever happening, right? This is why when I work with clients, we periodize your nutrition. We're not going to just diet you forever. Not only that, we're going to set you up, first of all, to actually be responsive for that fat loss phase. We'll get you into that fat loss phase. And then we will make sure to watch that we don't leave you there very long, right? Or forever, I should say. And then we pull you out at an appropriate time, and we give you those breaks. So if it's been 3 to 4 months, it's probably time for a break, and that's okay, right? Now, I want to be clear that this break does not mean a free-for-all. This is not just like, great, I'm just going to go back to what I was doing before and just have a good time. This is actually very strategic. You would go back to your maintenance, and hopefully, let's say you're working with a coach, or you're trying to do this the right way. You've established, first of all, what your maintenance is. If you don't even know what that is, how can we then go back to it? How will we know where kind of your set point is? So this break is really a chance to just increase calories a bit, give yourself a break physically, most importantly, like your thyroid, because that does get impacted with weight loss. But also mentally, it's really hard. It's really hard to diet, even for 3 to 4 months. That's a long time. So you want to make sure you're giving yourself these breaks, both physically and mentally. So how long of a break you take, this is where there's a lot of variety, and this is where you can be, how should I say, you can have some leverage, or not leverage, just some freedom to kind of try different things out. Now, a great thing one of my mentors has told me is using about 20% of the time you are dieting as a good estimate for that break. Right. So if you're dieting, let's say for 3 to 4 months, then yeah, you're going to want to probably take about 2 to 3 weeks then and just take that break and allow the body some time to just kind of restore and kind of understand that, okay, our survival is not at risk. Helps you just mentally feel a little better. Like, oh, I get a little more food. I don't have to be as rigid. Right. And then it allows you to keep going. Now, lots of times people feel like, oh, I'm like, taking 2 steps back, and I'll be honest, sometimes you may end up gaining a little bit of weight, a couple pounds, but let's just say overall, let's say you're trying to lose, I don't know, 30 pounds, right? And let's say in like 3 to 4 months, let's see, you end up losing, let's say 10 pounds, right? And then we take a break for a couple weeks and you end up putting a few pounds back on. So now you're at a net loss of like 8 pounds, right? But then we go back and we lose another 10 pounds, right? And so now overall you've lost 18. I'd say that's still a win, right? And we worked with your body, we worked with your physiology, we helped keep you, let's say, mentally sane during that time because we gave you a break, right? I would say that's not a step back, right? That's just being smarter about going about your actual results. So this is, you got to keep in mind that this is a normal part of like how your body operates. It's not going to want to be in a restrictive, like under eating mode for long periods of time. And so, in my opinion, you try to get ahead of these plateaus, right? And so, what did I say? Like, if we are going to take 20% of the time we're dieting to break, well, we can implement that actually early on, again, to kind of hedge against these adaptations that are normal. They're going to happen. Your body is not super thrilled about you kind of starving yourself. Even if you're being very moderate about your deficit, it's still going to perceive less food coming in. It's not going to like that, right? And so we can then, like I said, get ahead of that. So I think what gets hard is if you're on a roll and you've been losing weight, it gets hard to kind of decide, maybe I should get ahead of that and take a break beforehand, right? So that's like a mental block that you might have to just understand the long game versus the short game. That, yeah, it might be a temporary setback, but it's also a setup in order for you to continue to get your results, right? So there's so many ways you can do these diet breaks. You could do them, let's say, 1 day a week. I mean, that's always a very popular one that I'll do with clients is like after a couple weeks of just straight dieting, like, okay, let's start implementing a refeed day or a break day where we just go back to maintenance for 1 day to kind of just allow, that temporary relief. You could even do 2 a day, just depending on the person, where they're at mentally, and even like how they're responding to the protocol. You could do, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 2 weeks on, 1 week off. You could go 1 month in a deficit, take 1 week off, right? There's so many variations. I think the important part is just to make sure you take enough of a break, number one, and that you implement that in the first place and not wait so long that now you have to like kind of undo some of the damage that's been done, right? Like I talk to people all the time. We're like, oh yeah, I've been dieting for like a year. Like a year. Oh my goodness. Like that's a long time. It's a long time for your body to be getting the signal that like not enough food's coming in. We have some work to do. And in that case, it's not all is lost. It just means, well, there's probably a little more work that has to get done to kind of get things back where they should be optimized, where you see results, right? And so I think one way to really look at plateaus is really more of like, this is your body saying, hey, could you just give us a break? Like it's just been too much, right? It needs at some point to be eating sufficiently. You think about all that is needed just for the body to function properly. And when you're denying that, right, of course, things are going to start to go a little haywire. So, in my opinion, a plateau is really just your body saying, yeah, we just kind of need a break, right? And we can do that in a smart and an intelligent way. And how I would suggest, and what I do with all of my clients, is we get ahead of that by implementing these breaks or refeed, or whatever you want to call them, very strategically, pretty early on, right? Even if it feels like I don't want to, like I've been making all this progress, right? We just have to remember, okay, long term, this is going to ensure I keep going, right? And I actually get to that finish line at some point. I will end with just saying this is why it's so important just to periodize your nutrition or phase it out, meaning, you take time to go through the proper, I should say, channels, that we don't just like dive head first in there. I think I've used this analogy here. I ran a marathon in my 20s, so a while back now, but that was a huge endeavor. I wasn't really a runner. Maybe like I'd run a mile or two every once in a while if I felt like it. But friends were doing it. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to run this marathon with you. And and I'm a researcher by nature, as I started looking into like, okay, how do you prepare? I rapidly found out you need months to actually prepare for that, especially for someone who's just like an average like runner who has no like really great, I didn't have like great technique or form. Yeah, I ended up training, I think 4, if not 5 months prior to that. And even when I ran the marathon, I was very average. I mean, it took me a long time. And I was like pretty wrecked afterwards. Like it was an incredible toll on the body. And yet I had taken a lot of time, and I did all the workouts. I mean, I did all the training like exactly as it was laid out. I tried to eat as much as I could in order to like support that. And yet it still took a huge toll on the body. So imagine like just thinking, oh, I'm going to run a marathon tomorrow. Most of us are like, that's dumb. That's a bad idea. Right. It's the same thing with dieting, like deciding that like tomorrow I'm going to start a diet. Really? Are you ready? So we want to phase that out, right? Prepare yourself first. Certainly I like to actually assess like where are you even starting from. So like take a good look at like, okay, what's your starting point? All right, figure that out. Then take some time to just prepare. Like, is the body even in a place to take on the stress of dieting? Does it want to change right now? And you'll know that in terms of like whether health is optimized or not at that point. Get into your fat loss phase very strategically, and then have a plan for getting ahead of plateaus, right? Understanding your physiology, that your body's going to want to pull the brakes at some point. And so what can I do to get ahead of that, or to not be too aggressive? This is why I also don't encourage people to like crash diet. It doesn't tend to end very well anyway. So I think being very moderate, being patient, and understanding that breaks will need to happen, and that you can get your results. It just might take a lot longer than you thought when we're working with the body. I also find it generally helps you keep your results in the end, which is what people really want. I don't think anybody wants to like lose 20 pounds only to gain that back within a year. I don't think that's the goal, right? So what we're really trying to do is get your results in a sustainable, healthy way, and then keep them for the long term. So there you have it. How to deal with a plateau. Basically, are you even in a plateau, right? Have you given yourself enough time to figure out whether that's happening? 2 to 4 weeks, I think, is really an appropriate amount of time. And then looking at, is this truly a plateau in terms of like, am I actually even doing what I should be doing, right? Am I sticking to my deficit? Is there any additional stress? Are there new foods that are possibly getting in the way? Am I even tracking correctly, right? And if we've determined so, then looking at, well, how long? Because it's possible that like, I just need that break in order to keep going, right? And so making sure you get ahead of things by understanding breaks are going to be needed. So that's all I got for you guys today. This one was a little bit shorter, but I hope that was super helpful in terms of understanding like why plateaus happen, understanding how to evaluate whether you truly are in a plateau or not, and then what to do if you really do find yourself plateauing with your results. So, all right, I am going to go make some dinner. Have a wonderful Monday evening. I will see you guys next Monday for another training.